Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by. I'm launching a new trilogy or a three-part series that talks about my life. And the reason I'm doing that is because there is an important part of my life that I call the Great Downturn, or more importantly, as the title says, my dark night of the soul. Went on for 60 months, and it included actually several catastrophes. The greatest among them was losing my wealth, or a large part of my wealth. And during the 2008, with the Great Recession, as it's been referred to, but it was really a depression. And many companies were going bankrupt, and it was, if you were around in that time, you may remember how difficult it was. But so I'm going to talk about my own great downturn today, and then we're going to move on in part two, talking about my transcendence. I had the most wonderful experience at a Buddha retreat that was absolutely noteworthy and turned my life around. And it was one of those events that it was like an out of body experience. It was 5 days of one revelation after another with visions, and it was, I can't even describe it, but I can describe it a little better when we get to that chapter. And then the last part of the trilogy is what did I learn from that? And I learned what peak meditation experiences were. Well, I have meditated all my life, and in one way, shape, or another, I had never ultimately gotten to connecting all of the things the way I have here. And it was mostly because I spent so much of my time using my meditative experiences to create new things for my company. I wasn't experiencing my own personal spiritual path so much as I was using it to find solutions and create new products and that kind of thing. So I, I had developed it to a pretty high and sophisticated level, but only one side of me. It'd be like doing curls in the gym every day with just your right arm, and your left arm wouldn't become anywhere near as strong. So, well, I'm a self-made person who has enjoyed great success throughout my professional career. My life, yeah, as I mentioned, hasn't always been without its trials, and these achievements of 40 years that I had piled up, starting companies and selling them, and as an entrepreneur, starting them with new ideas and being innovative. Um, all of these achievements were now being rivaled by upsets of equal proportion that again started with the 2008 recession and then a chain of 11 events that befell me over the course of the next 60 months. And it turned a life of comfort and contentment into one of distress and despair. After 40 years as a successful entrepreneur, I faced circumstances that would test my resolve, my moral substance, and my faith in myself and the future. So this period of my life that I call the Great Downturn was probably the most pain and suffering I've ever had in my life. And it wasn't just for one episode. It was 11 episodes over 60 months. But I can tell you, pain and suffering is the greatest teacher I've ever had in my life. So there's a correlation here. When you have a pain in your life, pay attention to it. And that's kind of what this trilogy is about. There's a backside to it if we learn from it. I think the whole purpose of pain and the whole purpose of suffering is to awaken us to and evolve our consciousness to make our consciousness subtler and bring it to higher states of awareness. And that's what I experienced, for example, in episode 2, or the transcendence. I started after months of not even being able to get into a meditative state. I had these wonderful experiences that you'll just have to listen to understand. And even my explanations don't fully describe them. So the Great Recession was mainly due to the collapse of the real estate market and the result of fraudulent credit schemes engineered by the banking system, um, which was a great blow to me because it led to a great well, it was a great blow for everyone, the greatest global financial crisis since the Great Depression. Financial institutions like J.P. Morgan and Chase and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley were crumbling. The stock market was crashing, and personal and professional investments were wiped out with virtually no warning. And I was in that group. I lost tens of millions of dollars in the market downturn and experienced the financial collapse of lucrative companies that I owned and had started and were developing for the marketplace, among other colossal reversals of fortune, including multi-million-dollar lawsuits that resulted, fraudulent takeover attempts and bankruptcy that resulted, and I had to sell my primary residence and vacation homes, both at significant losses. Of course, I mentioned my investments in the stock market. There just seemed to be no end in sight. And when while the banks were getting bailed out, because remember they're too big to fail thing, and the reason the banking market failed was because they violated their own, in a fraudulent way, ethics by creating a false market for securitization of home mortgages, and you may remember that. And it was deceitful and it was fraudulent, and they brought it on the rest of the world, but others paid for it. They got bailed out. So the lifestyle I knew continued to be swept away in the financial avalanche. Um, Rolls Royces and mansions and boats and jets and vacation homes, investments, race cars, exotic vacations, premium champagne, and the money that had flowed like water to me was now, you might say, had gone over the waterfall, was pretty much gone. I didn't lose all my wealth, but the vast majority of it that I had earned over those 40 years. So if this is a story sounds like paying attention to, or please stay with me. I'd like to share the rest with you. Well, my financial upsides or upsets were accompanied by major health crises, as I mentioned earlier, including mononucleosis, adult onset diabetes, hepatitis, diverticulitis, and a motorcycle crash that landed me in the ICU. Though I took great care of my health and remained in peak condition, watched my diet, and had annual checkups, over that 60-month period, my body was telling me that something was really wrong. And my mental state, I think, was at the cause of my health to collapse. Alcoholism began to surface in my life. My occasional drinking grew to having drinks at home every day, which I never did, and grew consistently worse as the losses and the challenges mounted. That gave me, it gave me a false sense of relief, because during that time I was having a terrible time meditating. I couldn't focus and concentrate on my meditation practice at all. So I knew that was my go-to, but my mind was scrambled like the test pattern on an old TV. I just couldn't get focused, and this resulted in a separation from my wife after months of counseling had failed, which was yet another blow. So, in the span of 60 months, 40 years of unblemished success were erased. My health was in jeopardy. I lost two of my most treasured relationships, my wife and my connection to my higher state of being, my soul, um, or even God consciousness. And I felt as if I were repeatedly getting hit in the solar plexus, getting the wind knocked out of me with each blow. And before my lungs could refill, I would be hit again and again. There was no break between these events that were coming up. Um, Lawsuits and, like I said, motorcycle crashes, and it was just beyond my comprehension. I began to wonder if somehow there was a curse surrounding me. So I was becoming paranoid, and my mental state continued to deteriorate. And I knew this. I knew when I thought if there was a curse that something wasn't right with me mentally. My fear turned to anxiety. My anxiety had turned to depression. Depression to thoughts of suicide. My faith in myself and humanity at large were in real peril. The final blow that came during the 5 year period I'd begun was, as I mentioned in the previous line, losing my connection to existence consciousness, or the higher state of consciousness, which was my fail-safe resource for everything good. And soon it was gone completely. There were just no way to get into a meditative state. There were no intuitions or no clarity of thought that I had daily in my life over those 40 years, I think. I just couldn't reach my higher self. I couldn't attain anything even approaching a meditative state. I couldn't use my trusted dream technique that I've talked about in my book and in my postings here and other podcasts, or direct my intention to manifest so much as a ham sandwich, let alone create a path for my own recovery, or recovery for my businesses, or recovery for my spiritual life. I was adrift, and that powerful skill of concentration that I used in meditation and used it, um, for my business, and it transformed me now into a self-loathing, um, you know, guy manifesting self-defeat and feelings of stupidity and uselessness. This gift that had served me so well for so long was now beginning to destroy me. I was adrift in a lifeboat I was no longer sure I wanted to be in. Alone and isolated, I had only my deep depression and suicidal thoughts as companions. I'd never been in a place like this before. I'd always had such wonderful experiences in life and always successful, and there was always a sunshiny day just around the corner if it wasn't today. And I'd always been in charge, knowing what to do and when to do it. Now I was no longer in control. My mind was paralyzed with fear-based thoughts, and this fear had rendered me unavailable to my own higher intellect. And it cut off any possible help from higher states of awareness or existence consciousness outside of my own mind um, and, field of knowing. So I never really paid attention to the spiritual notion of surrender. I didn't understand how it could apply to me, a self-made man whose success was predicated on being in charge and making the right decisions. But it turned out surrender was the only thing that could save me now. It took me a while to figure that out and to discover it, but um, and and learning how to not be in control. That was the greatest journey I had yet to take, and not being in control and not calling the shots. That after 40 years of doing that, um, it was a big comeuppance. It was a big thing to learn. So we'll talk about that a little more now. I was no longer able to hold my head up living in Arizona, which had been my home for about 20 years at that time. There was no way I could face my peers as the failure I had become in my own eyes. I'd lost my identity as an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. I had been on many boards and raised tens of millions of dollars for charity, and in addition to investing a lot personally in charities, or contributing, I should say, not investing, to charities that I was more than happy to help. It was just that was a great source of pride in my life. And the pride behind all those plaques and awards and magazine covers in my trophy room now gave way to embarrassment and shame and a humiliation, an emptiness and a feeling of grief for the man I no longer was. So it was like a death. I was mourning the identity of an or yeah, I was mourning the loss of an identity I had carefully crafted over decades. The golden boy had vanished and bequeathed me with a damaged ego. The great downturn turned into a long, dark night of what turned out to be my missing soul. I couldn't find my soul in meditation, that's for sure. I decided to move from Arizona to a little town called Cedar Creek in Amador County in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas mountains. It was very near my home where I was born, actually, and I was a fourth generation Californian, and I spent my summer nights under the stars, sleeping outside, and that's where I began my journey as a seeker. I had so many fond memories as a child of that place. I felt it was the only place I could seek refuge and sort myself out, and it beckoned me. It called me to come there, and so I had old family acquaintances there who wouldn't be aware of my recent failures. And even if they did know, I'd still be just small town Frank, the guy from their memories. So, in one last attempt, uh, I asked my wife to come with me, but she refused, and rightfully so. I didn't um, argue with that. It was a good decision for both of us that she allowed me this time that to sort myself out. She was praying I could, so do that. So I returned to my childhood environment with the hopes of making a new start, and that I could somehow put this stuff behind me. Um, I began to look inward. After moving up there to the mountains for a short period of time, I joined AA to stop drinking. I was still drinking when I first arrived in California. Um, and AA is organized around the principles of surrender, a core principle of both rehabilitation and spiritual enlightenment. And I hadn't really paid too much attention to surrender in either one of those domains. It just didn't occur to me. So I opened my eyes and mind to the path AA offered. For I knew if I didn't get sober, there would be no other opportunities to heal. I know this sounds like outright hubris, but when I began attending AA meetings, I felt that my purpose there was just to help other members, to keep them sober and to get them on a path of rehabilitating. And yet, I had my own path to deal with, but I didn't. That that seemed to be secondary at the moment to me, and I don't know why I had that feeling, but it was truly there, and it give me motivation and incentive to go to meetings. And I was going to a minimum of one meeting a day, and sometimes two or three. The feeling of giving myself help, giving of myself to others was helpful to every aspect of my recovery. I came to discover. I was able to feel empathy for people whose circumstances in life were far worse than mine and had ever been, and it brought me back to the reasons I'd done charity work and raised funds for worthy causes. Uh, Being of service reawakened in me a life of purpose and became at first an unsteady step on my spiritual path or reimagined identity, but a step nonetheless. At least it was in my awareness what the kinds of things I needed to do. The recidivism rate of AA members, according to its own records, is probably around 95%. Um, and of those who join AA, most will drink again at some point. I noticed something interesting as I spent more time there, and it was the old timers, the ones who'd been sober for 20 or 30 or 40 years. They all had one thing in common that I seemed to notice. A lot of others did not. They were all genuinely empathetic. They didn't need to come to these meetings and share their stories and take time with new people after the meetings to encourage them in their sobriety and those kinds of things. But they did, and they meant every word of it, because being sober changed their lives in such a way and gave them such great pleasure that no matter what they did, even if they were a ditch digger, they had these experiences and not only the experiences, but now the talent, the resources to help others. So AA encourages its members to sponsor other recovering alcohols, and many do so so they can focus on the program's core principles and their own recovery to keep that on track. And this system is a useful means of support. However, when coupled with empathy, and the tool becomes truly effective and increasingly powerful. And these old timers all knew the message quite well. It was intuitive. They wrapped their arms around it and embraced it. And I think that's what happened to me. I saw that in myself, and I saw that in them. And so I felt quite at home with this program, and it really opened me to be receptive to surrender. I got it. I found that the meetings I was attending, sometimes a couple times a day, as I mentioned in the previous slide, um, was creating the empathy in me, which was a big focus of the last side, but and possibly at a level I'd never felt in my life before. But early on, I asked a couple of members, by the way, to sponsor me, and neither of those sponsorships worked out. Schedules were conflicting and those kinds of things. So And after a few months, I was content to continue on without one. So I was able to be successful. I consider myself successful. I've been sober years without even the thought of a drink now. I wouldn't touch it. It would just, it would ruin my meditation practice. So why would I do that? And my practice is so important to me and gives me such a connection to my higher self and and a spiritual universe as well. So during the first 90 days of AA, the physical addiction of wanting a drink was still pretty powerful. But finally it began losing its grip on me. And as that happened, my concentration became a little stronger, along with my appetite for carbohydrates to replace the sugar the alcohol had provided. And I was eating cookies and pie and ice cream and things I consciously walked away from for years in order to maintain my fitness level and my health. Um, I was getting to a point where I could read and think more clearly, and I ended up joining two meditation groups around this time. Although my meditation experiences were hit and miss in the beginning, I developed some camaraderie, and people didn't know my backstory there. I didn't share that with them. My backstory was pretty much reserved for my storytelling at the AA meetings, which was a great place for me to um, to self-analyze myself out loud. And it was things came out of my mouth, by the way, at those meetings that I was actually very surprised at. And I'm going, oh, that's what I was feeling, or that's what I was thinking, or it came from someplace deep within me because I was encouraged to get it out. I guess perhaps that's what happens in therapy. I haven't really had any personal therapy, um, but anyway, now I had two great resources. My meditation group um, was spiritual, and it wasn't, I wasn't having much spirituality entering into the picture here yet, but um, you know, I was coming back a little bit. I could see that, and I could feel it. So while I didn't know much about AA when I started attending meetings, I was encouraged by my older son, who is a recovering alcoholic, and at that time had been sober for over a decade. Um, I enjoyed AA, and I love the camaraderie. It did fill part of my spiritual void as well, and I think that was the empathy and the surrender, as we've talked about. So those hundreds of meetings I attended during that time served as a basis for my conscious self-inquiry. I began not in a deep meditative state, but in my physical conscious waking state reality, asking myself, why did I do that? How did I get to this point? Um, and I found later on when I got my practice back that I could get those questions answered a lot more efficiently in self-inquiry during meditation. Because I was still protecting myself. My ego was protecting me when I'd ask myself why I did certain things. Frankly, I was just in denial. So I could accept some of the truths, but I was in vigorous denial about a number of things that had happened to me that had led me to this, uh, to moving up um, to this what I call a retreat for myself, and I knew that wall had to come down. I had to examine every part of myself honestly, and I wasn't there yet. And like I said, I bolstered my recovery by attending meditation groups. And I had relatively relative success was one led by a therapist who had a strong foundation in the wisdom traditions. And I saw him in a professional capacity for a while as well because I had I had the wisdom tradition knowledge in my background, and it was a subject of great interest to me. I'd been studying, and as I have mentioned in other postings, I had these paranormal experiences for years, and the wisdom traditions and the study of the mind that they offered allowed me to at least intelligently understand a path that these experiences may have emerged from. And so I had a really good ally. Just the meditation teacher, I saw professionally and established what I think will be a lifetime friendship. Okay. Well, my concentration was weak in the beginning. I found meditating several times a day, or at least attempting to meditate for at least 10 minutes, was beneficial. I was gaining some clarity to reach point consciousness, or that place where I could, hold a steady focus, which I used to do for sometimes 2 or 3 hours at a time and more. But those that concentration was gone. So this was occurring only sporadically during this time. I wish it was happening every day, but it wasn't even happening every day. So I'd been practicing faithfully for several months with a strong desire to regain consistent access to my higher self. And that had been my goal at this point, and it was coming at best in fits and starts. So after my reversal of fortune and all my losses, I experienced that I had experienced reconnecting with existence consciousness, or the greater field of um, the greater field outside of myself that we all want to try and get to, um, was really my greatest goal, and or reconnecting with that field that I'd had such a relationship with at some level. And that was the one that would ultimately save me, if anything could. I, I assumed, I intuited, but I wasn't certain in the early stages of my meditative restart if I'd ever be graced with a steadfast connection to existence consciousness or God consciousness again. That was to remain to be seen. But then I began to have some success in reaching my own higher state of intellect. Just a flirting moment here and there. And so I did find myself going into these deeper meditations every once in a while, but again, sporadically. And little by little, I started reprogramming my dysfunctional behavior at the subconscious level. And I wasn't making a lot of progress. But I was attempting. Um, and this approach at reprogramming became very highly accelerated, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter, chapter 2, transcendence, because there I got some great relief, and boy, I was on a new path. So, and I'll tell you about that and how that happened. But all of these principles have become teaching elements in with my students and my writings and all. And I have built I've just built an understanding through the experiences and knowing. So this is the noetic portion of our experiences in life that are so important. No matter what somebody else says, I know my truth, and my truths have been hard to come by, but they have emerged, and they continue to evolve. No truth is static. Um, we may know a truth that everyone shares, and then we have experiences of our own that evolves that truth a little further and a little further. So um, truth and knowledge and self-knowledge can really only be known by us. Our truth. There's general truths, of course. We can all share in the truth of uh, physics as an example, as the law of the universe, but our own truths are pretty fungible and they apply to us and our evolution. So let's move on. Okay, we'll wrap up. I want to just give you a little preview of the next chapter, Transcendence, Vajrasofta Heals. And that's about the retreat the 5-day Buddhist retreat on basically Vajrasofta karma cleansing and purifying of mental defilements and bad karma. Well, I didn't know if that was what I needed, but it was the retreat was staffed by monks who who gave meditation classes uh, in the mornings for several hours prior to the actual karma cleansing classes getting started. And I was actually a little more interested in that because my meditations were making a comeback, and I thought maybe I could pick up some pointers or see something, or maybe talk to some of the monks to get some insight as to how to advance my practice forward, given my situation. Um, and it was, and That was really the motivation for me. The healing and purification techniques all sounded okay, and certainly something I'd be interested in learning about. But it wasn't the thing that was driving me to attend this retreat. And I'd learned about the retreat in one of my meditation groups, and they didn't oversell it. They just said it was a nice retreat. They had taken it the year before or a couple years before, and found it interesting, and they'd learned some things from it. And it was just a good place to be around folks who like to meditate. So that too was good enough uh, or motivation for me. So I didn't know much about Buddhism per se. I never really studied Buddhism directly. I understood its tenets and in general, uh, and so I was looking forward to learning about this practice of cleansing. But again, it wasn't my overall motivation. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little primer for the next chapter and hope this encourages you to come back and watch that. So if you'd like more information, you can go to our website, peakmeditationexperiences.com. I'm always available for meditation teachings or life coachings. And you can also book a free 30-minute Zoom call session with me if you'd like by just going to our site, peakmeditationexperiences.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to work with you. Okay, thanks.